This is Amiya Hazra saying Jai Baba to you. Well, I am asked by dear Irwin to narrate my story of coming in Baba's contact. It was in the year 57, to be more precise, on 8th December of that year. Previously, I was a college student studying December of that year. Previously, I was a college student studying English literature, but apart from English literature, was equally interested in a free pursuit of knowledge in all the faculties accessible to me at that time. My father was a doctor, and I was a great deal interested in looking into medical books, and also being a student of science during my school and also early college period. I was also very much interested in going through books of physics, books of chemistry, zoology, botany, and such like subjects. I was sharing, I think, as many of those of my age, the same doubts regarding religious and spiritual things which so markedly characterize the modern era. I should not be ashamed of saying that I was steeped in atheism at that time. Yes. And, well, of course, it wasn't atheism of what you call a sort of just hunting up for that word. It was not an unintellectual atheism. There was sufficient intellectual background for me to doubt the existence of so-called occult and spiritual things. For one thing, the spiritualists perhaps appear to me to be too esoteric and too surrealistic to be convincing. They were not exactly able to substantiate their claims. Secondly, all those books about spirituality, well, let me tell you at the outset that I didn't, of course it's fair reading even spiritual books. They meant to me very little. And I was personally very much drawn to what you call psychology at that time, and the books written by Freud, Adler, Jung, and such psychologists of eminence of Europe appeal to me very much. One thing particularly about worship of God or deities was there in my mind, and the reply, the answer that psychologists gave, particularly Freud, sounded very reasonable to me at that time. Freud said that worship actually originated from fear. The first man in the prehistoric, reasonable to me at that time. Freud said that worship actually originated from fear. The first man in the prehistoric period, when he saw the sun rising, might have knelt down out of sheer fear. And that was how worship started. We worshipped all those forces of nature which we couldn't control at that moment. And our worshipping one who is stronger than us is very clear. We do worship the stronger elements, forces, and even human beings because we want to keep them satisfied, pleased, and appeased to some extent. We want to avoid being harmed by them. Similarly, this worship cult began thousands and thousands years back due to fear. But after centuries, when man began to assert himself as an intellectual being, a sentient person who was better able to understand the laws of nature and better able to govern and control the forces of nature, fear was reduced to that extent. And one after another, our so-called gods, for example, pantheistic ideology of gods, God as serpent, God as fire, God as the ocean, and such like elemental forces disappeared from our shelves. So to me, fear appeared to be the root cause, and I was quite sure at that time that the day we conquered death, the most mighty of fears would go, and with that, God, the idea of God, will also vanish from the surface of earth. Well, I was in that mood when in 1954, Bhav Kalchuri, a Baba lover and one of the close disciples of Meher Baba, visited Jabalpur, and it was a meeting held in one of the localities of Jabalpur. I was not supposed to attend that meeting, but I was passing through, and suddenly something happened to me. It was some sort of irresistible pull that drew me to that meeting, and for the first time I heard the name of Avatar Meher Baba. Well, it didn't appeal to me, all that Bhav was telling us. I thought that Darwin has explained evolution better than what this disciple of Meher was doing. And so I left the place unimpressed. It was once again in 1956, when I was attending a wedding celebration at Meher, that one of Baba's disciples, Mr. Wael Muniraj, took the opportunity to talk to me and tell me about Baba. Well, as I had told you, I was a die-hard atheist, right down to my boots. I was not prepared to understand or believe. And Mr. Muniraj told me, why don't you see Baba? Maybe when you see Baba, after all your doubts might vanish. Well, it was possible only in 1953. When you see Baba, after all your doubts might vanish. Well, it was possible only in 1957. It was in 1957 that my first opportunity to meet Baba at Guru Prasad Pune came. I went there and I was just one, feeling very isolated and lonely as nobody knew me in Guru Prasad, and there was a throng of not less than 500 persons, all strange to me, all strangers to me, and of course I was with them, but I was feeling terribly lonely. When suddenly I heard shouts of Avatar Meher Baba ki Jai, Avatar Meher Baba ki Jai, and a car drove in to the portico, a blue car I distinctly remember, and the door opened and out came Avatar Meher Baba, dressed in pink coat and a white sadra. And when I looked at him for the first time, I felt he carried with him an indescribable beauty, splendor of roses on his cheeks, and his eyes bore the look of stars. He looked at me, paused for a moment, smiled, and went inside the hall where the darshan was to take place. His devotees hastened, and before I could rush in, I found that they were all seated and I was relegated to the rear of the hall. My eyesight being bad, I wasn't able to see Baba very well from that point. Secondly, what was gnawing at my heart was that I wasn't introduced to Baba, and there was nobody to introduce me to Baba, as nobody really knew me. It was my first darshan. But suddenly Baba looked at me, raised his hand, pointed his finger towards me like this, and with his sign language, he made certain gestures which his interpreter Ehrlich read, and to my wonder and amazement, Baba was spelling my name, Amiya Kumar. Then Baba again pointed towards me and told Ehrlich, this is Amiya Kumar. And Ehrlich said, Amiya Kumar, Baba wants you to come near him. I was really wonderstruck. I could never expect Baba to know me as Amiya Kumar, because that was our first physical meeting and there was no introduction at all. And with what simple omniscience, he simply knew. There was no effort to be made to know me. He knew that I was Amiya Kumar, who was such an atheist. Well, when Baba was calling me towards him, I felt a little shaky, unnerved, and I felt that I'll sink down and faint, because the presence was so august. And I inwardly prayed to Baba that since you know that I'm Amiya Kumar, you must also be knowing that I'm feeling terribly nervous. So Baba, spare me a bit, and don't ask me to go near you just now, because I do not want to a bit. And don't ask me to go near you just now, because I do not want to faint. And immediately Baba raised his hand and made a gesture like this, and Erach interpreted it like this. He said, Amiya Kumar, Baba says, stop. Don't come to Baba just now. Sit near Baba. And I went to another side on the left flank and sat close enough to Baba. Then Baba looked at me, did a gesture like this, and Erach again interpreted, said, Baba said that, Amiya, you were not able to see me clearly from that distance. Now I hope you are able to see me very clearly from here. I said, yes, Baba, I am. Well, Baba got busy with some discourses he was giving to the audience at that time, his devotees, but I wasn't much hearing those discourses. I was looking at his infinite beauty and his compassionate and loving face, and in my heart I was repenting for all those unkind remarks I had made, for all Sadgurus and avatars and masters and spiritual people not understanding anything in my intellectual arrogance, vituperating them, abusing them, and doubting them, including Meher Baba. Now, in my heart, as I was repenting, I looked at Meher Baba, who was looking towards another person, inwardly praying, Baba, you know me. You must know what I've been saying about you, all the insults I was heaping in your absence. Now, please look at me and just make me feel that you're forgiven that all. And immediately Baba turns his face like this towards me, and with what a compassionate gaze he looked at me. I couldn't somehow tolerate the immensity of that compassion. And like a child, I broke into sobs. And I knew that it was very unmanly to do it. And I even had to bite my fingers in order to control myself, but I couldn't control myself. And then Baba turned away his face and got busy with discourses. After I think about 15 minutes, again I started inwardly praying, Baba, look at me again, and with that self-same loving gaze, and just reassure me that you really love me and you have forgiven me and my shortcomings of past. Once again, in immediate response to my prayers, he looked at me with a very compassionate smile, and then I felt for sure that Baba has owned me despite all my shortcomings and all my arrogance and vanity. That was how my first meeting took place. Thereafter, I had met Baba several times, and still there was a period of testing. I wouldn't really like to believe anything unless it was sort of proved to me. And I can narrate many such incidents in my life. For example, in my rather childish, I can narrate many such incidents in my life. For example, in my rather childish eagerness to test Meher Baba's omniscience and omnipotence. One day, returning from the sports field, I just shouted at nothing, nowhere, but in a sort of ironical way, I said, "Oh Meher Baba, if you are omniscient and omnipotent, well, my throat is dry. Why don't you produce some lozenges for me?" let me have some lozenges. And to my great surprise, when I was returning home from the sports field, a friend of mine accosted me, stopped me on the way, and offered me a few lozenges. I couldn't understand it. I know that he doesn't take lozenges. And I had to ask him, why, you are aged enough, you don't go for lozenges, don't you? He said, well, I generally don't, but I've got pharyngitis. As such, the doctor told me not to smoke. And in order to beguile my time and my desire for smoking, somehow, I have taken to lozenges. Why don't you share some of them? Well, I relegated this incident as just a coincidence. I again tried to forget that Baba had really provided me with lozenges just to prove that he was at my beck and call. But after a few weeks at home, my mother wanted some lemons to be brought from the market and I didn't want to go to the market. So I again entered my small room and said, oh Meher Baba, wherever you are, as your devotees tell me that you are God the omniscient and omnipotent, why don't you produce some lemons for me? You see, I'm not in a mood to go to the market. And within, say, a few minutes, lemons came from a friend of mine, Dr. Ganguly of Devapur, and for a minute I was taken aback. I just wanted to understand this process, and later I gave it up and said that this was just a coincidence. It wasn't Baba doing it. Next day, my mother was a little worried because she had not received any letters from my sister for a long time, and she was complaining about it, and she was saying maybe that my sister's ill. Asked me, why don't you send a telegram to find it out? I said, well, don't worry, you are going to get a letter this day. I went into my small room again and said, Baba, I have told my mother that you're going to get a letter, but I really never know whether she's going to get a letter. Why don't you make it possible that a letter comes this afternoon from my sister? And once again, to my surprise, the postman was there and the letter came. But in the evening, I made up my mind not to believe it as one of Baba's works. I thought it was just another coincidence. Then I was sent to Mandla and I joined the Rani Durgavati College there to teach English. There we were not getting accommodation, and there were two more professors with me who were desperately seeking for accommodation in the town. Now I had already, as I told you, I was in testing and trying Meher Baba. And in Mandla, I told those two colleagues of incredulous, and I then told them that, well, let us see whether it happens or not. Inwardly I prayed to Meher Baba, Baba, the first man we are going to meet, take money order.